V is for visionary. Hello, my name is Naomi Billingsley and I'm a scholar of British art, with a specialism in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the period that is often called the Romantic period. This term is used to describe a shift in the way that artists and writers looked at the world from a tendency to a rational approach in the preceding Enlightenment period, also known as the Age of Reason, to a more creative, imaginative, or even visionary way of looking at the world. One of the artists from this time that is most closely associated with the term visionary is William Blake, and my own book about the artist is entitled The Visionary Art of William Blake. In this talk, I'm going to introduce Blake's idea of visionary sight as a creative way of looking at the world via an extract from one of his letters. I'll then offer some thoughts on how Blake's idea of visionary sight can be seen in his works in the Whitworth collection, and conclude with some reflections on the enduring appeal of his visionary ideas. It's August 1799, and the Reverend Dr. John Trussler of Egham in Surrey has commissioned Blake to work on a series of designs depicting moralistic subjects, such as malevolence, pride, and benevolence. Blake sends Trussler his watercolour Malevolence, which is now in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and writes to Trussler on the 16th of August with an explanation of the design. Blake tells his patron that he had tried to follow the instructions that he had been given, but he was moved to follow his own idiosyncratic take on the subject. We don't have Trussler's reply, but it is evident from Blake's response on the 23rd of August, the letter from which I'm about to read, that Trussler thought that Blake had completely missed the mark with his take on malevolence. This letter is a brilliantly defiant riposte, which turns Trussler's criticism back on him to assert that perception is in the eye of the beholder, and that Trussler's perception is lacking. It is an important account of Blake's idea of visionary perception. As it's a long letter, I'm not going to read it all, but you can do so and view the digitised manuscript easily online on the William Blake Archive and on the British Library website. And there are links to both websites on the screen. Blake begins sarcastically, "I am really sorry that you have fallen out with the spiritual world." And then he goes on to say a number of other less than polite things to his patron about the way that the patron is approaching his work. The most important passage for Blake's idea of visionary sight is about halfway through the letter, where Blake writes, "I feel that a man may be happy in this world, and I know that this world is a world of imagination and vision. I see everything I paint in this world, but everybody does not see alike. To the eyes of a miser, a guinea is more beautiful than the sun, and a bag worn with the use of money has more beautiful proportions than a vine filled with grapes. The tree which moves some to tears of joy is, in the eyes of others, only a green thing that stands in the way. Some see nature all ridicule and deformity, and by these I shall not regulate my proportions. And some scarce see nature at all. But to the eyes of the man of imagination, nature is imagination itself. As a man is, so he sees. As the eye is formed, such are its powers. You certainly mistake when you say that visions of fancy are not to be found in this world. To me, this world is all one continued vision of fancy or imagination, and I feel flattered when I am told so." In other words, Blake is telling Trussler that the reason that he is baffled by the picture that Blake painted for him is not that Blake has produced an inadequate picture, but that Trussler hasn't trained his eye to see the world in a visionary way. Vision, in other words, is in the eye of the beholder, and those who see in a visionary way see a better world. But Blake's idea of seeing the world as one continued vision of fancy or imagination should not be mistaken for a view of the world through rose-tinted glasses. He had a strong social conscience, and rejecting that which fell short of the visionary ideal was just as important for Blake as embracing the visionary ideal when he encountered it. This is a good point to turn to look at some of Blake's works in the Whitworth collection, where we see conflict between vision and error at work. Probably the most famous of Blake's works in the Whitworth collection is The Ancient of Days. This is an image that Blake returned to repeatedly throughout his career. You will see in the caption that it has two dates. 1794 is when Blake created the printing plate for this design, which first appeared as part of one of his self-published books called Europe. 1827 is the date that Blake is thought to have printed and coloured this impression, or copy, of the print. One of Blake's friends reported that he was working on a copy of this print on his deathbed, and it is said that this is the Whitworth copy. This design is actually a representation of a vision that Blake himself experienced. He saw this figure at the top of the stairs at his home in Lambeth. I see this image as a sort of anti-icon for Blake's visionary way of looking at the world. The figure, who resembles traditional depictions of the Christian God the Father, is holding a pair of dividers over the face of the world below him. In other words, he is imposing rational order on it, the antithesis of the imaginative, visionary worldview that Blake celebrated. It seems then to be a very ominous image of the powerful deity controlling the world. But as with many of Blake's pictures, the more we look at it, the stranger it is. The figure is compressed and confined by the fiery orb in which he crouches, and his hair and beard are blowing in the wind. So perhaps he is not all-powerful. There seem to be some external restrictions imposed on him, and so his efforts to impose rational order on the world are perhaps in vain. And there is hope yet for the visionary in this image. The other most important Blake works in the Whitworth collection are a set of 6 watercolours that illustrate a poem by John Milton about the Nativity of Jesus. I'm not going to discuss them in detail individually, but I want to highlight how they also depict conflict between vision and error. The first image at the top left of the screen represents the descent of peace as a result of the birth of Jesus. We might see this image as an example of the world as a visionary ideal. Although Blake was by no means a conventional Christian, he saw Jesus as the ideal artist and visionary because he changed the way that people saw the world, and he criticised the social ills of his day. The next image depicts the shepherds experiencing a visionary encounter with the angels, announcing the birth of Jesus. The angels appear as a blazing visionary orb in the sky. The next 3 images in this group represent the overthrow of various pagan gods. In other words, as both Milton and Blake saw it, the rejection of various gods that were worshipped in error. Then, after this conflict, the scene returns to one of visionary harmony, with another image of the stable where the baby Jesus and his parents are at peace. Blake's art and ideas were not appreciated by many in his lifetime, a fate that many visionaries suffer because their work is challenging to the mainstream. But Blake's works have since been enormously influential for generations of artists, and he has been hailed as a visionary not only in the sense of having a creative way of seeing the world of his day, but also in the sense of having prophetic ideas that have enduring relevance. As part of the Whitworth School of Creativity, you'll be able to explore an online collection for the theme of V for Visionary. Several of the artists included in that collection were influenced by Blake. Samuel Palmer was a younger disciple of Blake who knew the artist at the end of his life in the early 19th century. and David Jones and Cecil Collins were 20th century artists who were both inspired by Blake. Other artists in the collection had similar independence of vision and creative ways of looking at the world. In 2020, many of us have experienced the world in new and different ways. Perhaps discovering new things on local walks as we stayed closer to home, or having an increased awareness and appreciation of key workers. And we're all trying to imagine a world beyond the pandemic. Perhaps now, more than ever, is a time for visionaries.